Howdy, this is Michael, and today I'm back with another video walkthrough, and today we're going to take a look at Dark Horse. Dark Horse was originally published on Kickstarter, but now it's available from the company called Nightworks. Dark Horse is designed by Don Lloyd. It plays 4 players, 1 to 4 players, ages 13 and up, and the box says in about 30 to 90 minutes. Thematically, it's set in the Wild West, or the American West, and there is territory building and land grab and resource collection, so it kind of reminded me of Settlers of Catan in that respect. Mechanically, it's a dice placing game, I would say, so in the vein of Alien Frontiers, Kingsburg, or the Castles of Burgundy. As I already said, it plays 1 to 4 players. For the solo game, there's 3 difficulty levels and 5 different scenarios, so that'll keep you occupied for some time. Then there's a 2-player game, there's a variant to the 2-player game, and there's a 3 and 4-player game. And today what I'm going to show you is a 3-player game and how it could look like. I guess that's all. Have fun watching.
So let's take a brief look at the components and then we're ready to start the game. I've set up the board and placed all the resource hexes. Some of them face up, some of them face down, exactly as instructed in the rules. On the outside of the game board I put the various tokens close to the action spaces that they are associated with. Over here we have the token supply, the rails, and then we have the character cards for each of the 3 players. Here we have the blue player, he's playing the cowboy. As we can see, his bonus start goods are a bonus die and 2 food. That's why he has 3 dice, because 1 is a bonus die and 2 food. And each player starts with a wild die token and 1 of each kind of the resources. And here are his cities and towns. Over here we have the merchant. She starts with a trade token and 2 extra resources, and I've chosen food and ore here. Over here we have the reference cards. Those are double-sided, but since there are 2, I put them side by side. And finally we have the green player, and he's playing Tom Vassal, the preacher. And he starts with 1 extra influence point on the track over here. So as we can see, he has 1 point, and the others start at 0. And I've also put the game end token on the 11th space on the influence track. Finally, I've already gone through the game setup for the cities and the towns. So we have a player order: blue starts, then green, then red, and then reverse player order. I put down the starting cities and towns, and basically I've put each of the cities next to the or into the safe zones next to the wood and food spaces, exactly as instructed for a starting game. And I've put each rail so that it points towards the closest ore hex. I guess that's a good starting point for a learning game. Maybe with more experience the setup could be done differently, but for now I think it's fine this way. And yeah, now we're ready to start the game. Okay, before we actually start playing the game, let's take a look at all the action spaces and which kind of choices there are. So one of the big differences is we have these silver ones and we have the brown ones. On the normal brown ones, only 1 person can go. On the silver ones, as many players can go as they like, but each player can only go there once. On here it's a little different. We have spots for 2 and more players and spots for 3 and more players, and each player can put as many dice as he wants down there, but each player can go into each row only once. So basically each player can go 3 here, a maximum of 3 times in this row, and this row, and in this row. Then there's difference between numbers and dice showing numbers. This means that you can claim it with any combination that adds up to this amount. It's basically a 2 or 2 1s. Over here that means a 1 and a 5, a 6, 2 3s, and so on. But these, you have to have the number. like a 3, a 4 and a 5, and there's no way around this. Down here we have a restricted space. This is a little bit similar. Here it says it's a 10, and you have to meet the 10. The other ones you can manipulate a little bit. For example, there's options to put a +1 or -1 to a die, so if you have 8 and make it +1, that's a 9. This is not possible here. You have to have a 10, so 2 5s, a 6 and a 4, and so on. Also, there are ways in which you can share spaces with others. So normally this is not possible, but there's a way around this. This doesn't hold here. So on these 2 restricted spaces, really only one person can go. Each round consists of 2 phases, a placement phase and a collection phase. And the placement phase starts by each player rolling their 2 or 3 dice. And let's just do that now. So we got 2 5s over here, a 6 and a 5 over here, and a 2, a 4 and a 6. One thing that would happen is, because the green player rolled doubles, he would get another wild die token, because that happens when you roll doubles, but he still has 1, and you can only have as many tokens as you have cities. So unless he hasn't got another city or spends this one, there's unfortunately no way he will get another wild die token. Okay, so that was the first step of the placement phase, rolling the dice, and now in player order, that means starting with the blue player, players can place their dice. Okay, so the blue player decides to use his 6 die and place it onto the builder action. Then the green player decides to use his 2 5s or a 10 and put them on the mayor action. And the red player decides to take his 5 and put it onto the rail baron. And he takes his 4 and puts it onto the work crew space. And the red player takes their 6 die and a wild die token, which allows them to treat it as 1 less or 1 higher, and puts both of them on the 7-8 engineer space. And then finally the blue player uses his 2 and puts it on the hired hand, making sure he gets another bonus die next round. Okay, so this was the placement phase, and now we can go into the collection phase. Now in the collection phase we start up here and go over each of the action spaces and see where somebody has placed the die, and then this action is resolved. So here the blue player basically put it on the hired hand, meaning he gets a bonus die next round, so he just put this die back with him. Then on the work crew it says produce resources on 2 hex types. So the blue player only has 2 different hex types, so he has wood and food, and if he chooses them, then for each type he gets as many resources as he has towns on these. So he has 1 town on wood and 1 town on food, meaning that he gets 1 wood and 1 food from the supply. And we can remove the die. Now the red player is on the rail baron action, which says that he has to pay 2 ore and 1 food to get 2 rails. So we move 2 ore and 1 food back to the supply, and we get to place 2 rails. And rails have either to go next to other rails that are connected back to your cities, or next to your cities. So what the red player does is putting 1 up here and 1 putting down here, gaining access to the 2 ore spaces in the process. Then the blue player is on the builder space. In the builder space you can either build a town for 2 food and 1 wood, or a city for 1 gold and 4 wood, and the blue player wants to build a town. So he basically pays 2 food and a wood and puts a new town. So the only choice is here, because he doesn't have any he doesn't have access to any other resource spaces yet. So we flip this over and we see it's a wood space, so we can go there. Then the red player put a die on the engineering action, which means he moves up 1 in turn order, pushing down the green player. And he also gets an engineering token and a wild die token. So you can basically use the wild die token he put on there and an engineering token, and also his die goes back. And finally the green player is on the mayor space. On the mayor space it says that he gets 1 influence point, so we move him up on the track. Then he can take any 1 resource. He decides to take an ore. And finally he gets the mayor token, which is this nice key over here. Okay, so much for the first collection round or phase, and now we go back to another placement round. So all players roll their dice again. The green one has a 2 and a 2. Again, he doesn't get a wild die token, although he rolled doubles. The red player, 4 and a 1. And the blue player, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the blue player decides to use his 4 and his 3 as 7 and put them on the trader space. And then next up is the red player. The red player takes his 4 and puts it on the work crew space. And the green player takes his 2 and puts it on the hired hand space. And then blue is up again. He decides to re-roll his blue die by giving up his wild die token, and it's a 1. So what he decides to do is put it here on the produce resource spaces in the wood row. Then the red player has a 1 left, but he decides to use engineer token, and what an engineer token lets you do, as you can see on the back here, you can change a die to any number. So he gives up the engineering token and puts this die on a 6 and onto the builder space. And then the green player also decides to reroll this die by giving up wild die token. And it's a 2 again. That's not good. So there's not much left, except for maybe taking a loan. This is probably too early. So he decides to also go on the produce resource spaces, and it doesn't really matter. So he goes for food. Starting activating the spaces, the blue player put his die into the food row, meaning he gets as much food as he has towns on food spaces, and that's 2. And we can remove the die and put it over here because the bonus die is gone. And the blue player gets 2 wood. The green player put his die on food, and he has 1 food space, so he gets 1 food. Then the green player put his die on the hired hand space, so we can take that die back and also give him the bonus die for next round. The red player put his die on the work crew, and he may produce on resources on any 2 hex types, but he only has 2 different types and 1 on each, so basically he would produce a food and a wood. But we can see over here that he chose the building action, so he can just pay another food and then get a town for that. So 1 food. And then for the town he has basically 2 choices, but this terrain down here is rugged, so it would cost an additional ore to put down the town here, and he doesn't have any ore, so he goes here, putting his town here, and now he has access to ore. And then finally the blue player went on the trader space, and as you can see on the trader space you can pay any 4 resources and either take 1 gold or any other 2 resources. And what he does is giving up wood and food for 2 ore, because he wants to build rails and he doesn't have any other access to ore. Okay, next round, next placement phase. The green player rolls 3 dice, getting a 2, a 3 and a 6. The red player gets a 1 and a 2, and the blue player gets double 6s. The blue player with his double 6s decides to claim the tycoon space, which is only possible with a 12. And as you can probably imagine, the odds of getting a 12 on two 6-sided dice is not that big, so he should take this chance. The red player still has a wild die token left, so he decides to reroll his dice, getting 2 3s in the process, and I believe that actually right back earns him the wild die token because he rolled doubles. And then he decides to take a 3 die and put it into the produce resource spaces, but in the 4+ slot and on ore. And he's actually allowed to do that because on the merchant card it says one of the special abilities, number 4, you may use the additional resource ability on the produce resource action on a 3+. Okay, then the green player takes his 3 die and goes for the politics action. The blue player doesn't have any dice left. The red player has another 3, and again he decides to move into the produced resource spaces, and this time for food. The green player places his remaining 8 on the engineer space. Now collecting. Over here, the red player gets food, as many as he has towns on food resources, and that's 1, but since he placed his die into the additional resource spot, he gets another food, so 2 food altogether. And for ore it's the same, 1 ore because 1 hex with ore on it and another one, so all in all the red player gets 2 food and 2 ore. The green player is on the politics space where it says pay any resource to get 1 influence point, but actually the green player is mayor at this time, and the mayor ability says that he can disregard this payment, so basically he just gets 1 influence point for free, so he's on 3. Then over here he gets +1 in turn order, which is good since he's last actually at this point, so now he's in 2nd place, and he also gets an engineer and a wild die token. And then finally, the blue player is on the tycoon space, so he gets he gets a gold, and he's also allowed to place a rail, and he also decides to go for ore because that's what's missing at this point, and you need ore to further spread out. The green player rolls a 4 and a 3, the red player rolls a 5 and a 3, and the blue player rolls double 6s again. So we can start right off. The blue player will place them on the tycoon space again. The green player picks his 3 and puts it into politics again. The red player takes a 5 and a wild die token, making it into a 6 and putting it on the builder space. The green player uses his engineer token to make his last die into any die, and he chooses a 5, which allows him to put it into the rail baron space. And the red player takes a 3, again using the special ability of the merchant to put it into the additional resource for space, and he decides to go for wood. Okay, starting with the collection phase, the red player gets 2 wood, 1 for his hex and the other one because it was in the additional space. The green player is on politics again. Again, he doesn't have to pay because he's still mayor, so he moves up 1 space again. He's now on 4, while the others are on 0. Then the green player gets to place 2 rails by paying 2 ore and a food. Following the usual pattern, he decides to branch out like this. Then the red player used the builder space, and he decides to build a new town for 2 food and a wood. And there are different choices. You could either go into this food space right here or the other ore space down here, and he decides to go into the food space. And actually, once you have access to resource hexes, and you have access, for example, by having a city here, you can always take a look at them. So actually the red player could have looked at this before he decided to build the town. And finally the blue player again collects 1 gold and is allowed to build another rail, and he also puts it here. The green player rolls a 3 and a 4. The red player 2 1s, snake eyes basically, but that's a double, and because of that he gets a wild die token. And the blue player rolls a 4 and a 1. The blue player with a 1 die and another die decides to take the pioneer action, which requires a 1 die and something else. The green player puts his 3 on politics again, and the red player decides to spend his wild die token and reroll his 2 1s. Then the red player decides to put a 2 into the hired hand space. The blue player doesn't have any dice left. The green player takes his 4, puts it into the work crew space. Oh no, rather he puts it into the produce resources space. And then the red player has a 3 left, and he also puts it into the produce resources space. Of course he would also have liked food, but he now goes for wood. Okay, starting to collect. The red player gets 2 food. Wood, sorry about that. The green player, now he gets 2 food. Now the blue player selected the pioneer action, meaning that he gets to take a look at the top 2 action cards. And one is an event. So in this case the event will be played and he gets to keep the other one. If it would have been 2 action cards, then he could have chosen which one he wanted to take and the other one would have been discarded. And finally, if there would have been 2 events, then the whole deck and the discard pile would have been reshuffled. So basically what happens, the jailbreak event is put into play and it says if a player has the sheriff role, it is removed. That is not the case, nobody has it. The sheriff action now costs 9+ instead of 10+, so we can put it here. And also we can take this handy event marker, put it on the sheriff space, probably like this, I guess. And we now know that there's something special going on. And finally, the player can keep the crooked merchant's card. Then the red player has the hired hand, so he simply collects an additional die. The green player is into politics again, going to the 5 space. The green player rolls a 1 and 5. The red player 2 2s and a 4. And the blue player stopped his streak of rolling 12s and has a 1 and a 5. And actually, because we just put a permanent card into play in the last round, and on the cowboy it says whenever a permanent event is put into play you receive a bonus die during the next placement phase, he actually would have rolled another die, so let's just do this. And there's another 5. The blue player uses his 10 to take the sheriff action. The green player puts both of his dice as a 6 on the builder's action. The red player uses a 4 and a 2 as a 6 for the trader action, which he can. That's a special ability of the merchant, or rather one of the special abilities. The blue player has his 1 left and he puts it on the produce resources and he chooses wood. Then the green player doesn't have any dice left, and the red player takes a 2 and puts it also on the previous research spaces. So the red player, because he has 2 food spaces, gets 2 food. And because the blue player has 2 wood spaces, he also gets 2 wood. Those are removed and we actually can put back The die from the red player has 6 and chosen a builder space. So for 2 food and 1 wood, he can build another town. And he decides to put it here to gain access to ore. Then on the trader space it says pay any 4 resources to take 1 gold. And so the merchant gives away any 4 resources and gets a gold. And finally the blue player went to the sheriff space, where he moves first in turn order. He already did that, but then he also gets the sheriff token and the deputy die. And we'll see what those mean in a second. The green player rolls 2 dice. He gets a 6 and a 4. Red player gets a 2 and a 2. That's a double, so he receives a wild die token. And the blue player replaced one of his dice with the deputy dice, and he gets a 1 and a 4. Okay, so the blue player uses the ability of the deputy dice, which is he can flip it to his other side, making the 1 into a 6, and then he puts the 6 onto the builder space. Because if you flip the deputy die, you have to put it by itself somewhere. But he did this, so it's okay. The green player uses his wild die token to make this 4 into a 5, and then basically he has 11, 6 and 5, and he puts it into broker space. And then the red player, with only 2 2s, he decides to spend his wild die token that he just received, and he rolls the dice. And then with a 4 and a 5, he decides to take the scout action on the 9. Then the blue player has his 4, and he puts it into the additional resource space on the produce resources action space. And then we can start the collecting phase. So the blue player has 2 spaces with wood plus additional wood. That makes 3 wood. Then the blue player also placed on the builder space, and for 1 gold and 4 wood you can build a new city. So the blue player gives away 4 wood and a gold, and he can place a new city basically anywhere where there's a rail on the side of a hex. So basically he could put a city here or here. However, it states that cities must be 1 space apart, so basically the only place where he can put a city is here. And now that the blue player has 2 cities, he may control 2 of each special token, and he thinks this is a good time to place the action card he got earlier. And you can play 1 action card immediately before or immediately after you collect dice from an action space and perform the appropriate action. So basically after the action from the builder space was done and the blue player had constructed another city, he plays the crooked merchant's cards, which says you receive as many trader tokens as cities as you control. That's 2, and because he doesn't have any trading tokens yet, he simply gets 2 of them, and the card is discarded. The red player is on the scout space, and the scout space lets you do 2 things. First, you may look at an unrevealed hex, and so one of the closest hexes is maybe this one. So the red player may take a look and see that it's food, put it back. And then also you may take a look at the 3 top cards in the action card pile. So I'll just put them over here. If there's 1 event card, which there is, it will have to be played. And then from the other cards, we may decide to keep 1. We decide to keep this old Dan Tucker card. The other one is put back on top of the deck. And finally, we put the Bank Robbers event card into play. And it says, gold now costs any 5 resources when using the trader action. So this jailbreak from earlier is removed because there can only ever be 1 permanent event. The event marker is moved onto the trader action. So remember there's something wrong or odd basically that the gold now costs 5 resources. And also the player playing this card may choose to take 1 gold from the bank this turn only, but then he would have to put 2 dice into jail next round, but nevertheless we'll do that because we're the merchant and we're kind of greedy also. So 1 gold, but 2 dice have go to jail, and that's basically all we have. And here they are in jail. And then finally the green player takes a stock token because of the broker action, and a stock token says exchange for 3 resources or 1 gold at any time as needed, and the green player decides that right now it is needed and he takes a gold. And because we just put a new permanent event into play, the blue player receives an extra bonus die. The green player rolls the dice, he gets a 6 and a 5. The red player doesn't have any dice to roll, so basically he does nothing, and the blue player gets 3 sixes. Wow. What he does is place one of the 6s on the builder action. The green player puts both of his dice on the broker action again, and then the blue player puts both of his dice on the tycoon action. So before the blue player uses his builder action, he decides to take trade in one of his trade tokens, and on the trade token it says trade any 2 resources for any other 2 resources as needed. So we discard this, and what we'll do, we give away 2 ore, actually 1 ore, no 2 ore away, and we'll take back 1 ore and 1 food, and then for 2 food and 1 wood, and then he decides to place a town on the ore resource X here. The green player gets another stock token, and then the blue player is the tycoon again, so he gets another gold, and he may place another rail, and he puts it here. Okay, then I will stop the walkthrough here and now talk a little bit about the things in the game that I haven't shown you yet. One is a dealer action over here. You can place any dice on there, and then it has a little lightning bolt symbol, which means this action is resolved immediately in the placement phase. And what you can do is +1 or -1 to 1 die and immediately place that other die with +or -1. Or you can take a loan, and a loan is also resolved immediately, and you take any 3 resources, and you have to pay back the loan with 6 resources before the end of the game, or else you get -1 victory points. Then we've all seen these actions, but then finally down here there's the market, and the market offers you different possibilities for trading resources, 3 to 1, or 3 resources for 1 gold, or 1 gold for 6 resources. It requires any die, but the options are worse than on the trading space, and also it's the last space, so basically everything you get there you can't use this turn. Here on the turn order you could actually manipulate it if you place a die of 3 or higher next to any spaces, and you have to start on top with the first space, and after that is filled you can go to the other space. Then for the next round you will have that space, or starting from the next round you will have that space. So if you put here, you would move first and the others would slide down, keeping their order amongst each other. I actually made a little mistake before, because if you take a look at the Crooked Merchant card again, it has this little corruption symbol here, which means when the blue player used it, he would have had to move to last space in turn order. So I forgot this, but this is the corruption symbol. Then you've seen quite some abilities of the merchant character. The one that you can pay less for 2 resources in the trader action, you can trade the trader action on a 6+, and that you get additional resources on the produced resources space if you put down a 3+ instead of a 4+. And finally there's when you take the merchant action, pay 1 gold to receive any 4 resources. Then the cowboy would have been able to take the scout action on 8+, a little cheaper. Also the sheriff action. And finally the preacher. He can't use any jail cards, so for example on this bank robbery card we had earlier, he wouldn't have been able to choose the jail option. If he had a card with a jail icon on it, an action card, he could discard it from the game to get an influence point. He would be able to ignore all penalties and effects from permanent events, so for example, due to the bank robbery, getting gold on the trader space is harder. He could ignore that if he wanted to. And finally, that's a nice ability, but it hasn't come into use yet. Give any 1 resources to an opponent, then trade any 1 resource you own for any 1 resource from the bank. Okay, now finally let's take a look at scoring and score the points as if the game would have been over. There are 2 conditions that would trigger the end of the game. The first is when one player has built all their cities and all their towns. That's 3 cities and 6 towns. And the other one is when one player reaches or crosses the game end token on the influence track. Okay, so basically each influence point is a victory point. So at this point the green player would get 5 points, and I'm just trying to track the points with the dice here. Then each gold is another 2 points. So each gold is another point, so blue would have 2 points and red would have 2 points. And the green player would also get 2 points for his gold, because you are allowed to trade in a stock token for a gold right at the end of the game. Then next, each special role, like the mayor or the sheriff, is worth another point, so the green player is actually at 8 and the blue player is at 3. Then each city scores as many points as it's connected to towns via rails. So basically this city is not connected to any of the 3 towns, but to that one over there. So this city scores 1 point for the red player. The same with the green player back here. 1 town is connected to the cities, the others aren't, so this city scores 1 point for the town. So we're actually at 9. And with the blue player, each city is connected to 2 towns via rails, so each city scores 2 points for a total of 4 points. So actually the blue player is at 7. Okay, so that's influence points from the track, gold, cities, special rows, and then there's some points that you can lose. If you had any unpaid loans at the end of the game that you couldn't repay, that's minus 1 point for each loan. And if you have any dice left in jail, which is the case with the red player, you lose 1 point no matter how many dice there are in there. So actually at the end of this sample game, the green player has 9 points, the red player has 2 points, and the blue player has 7 points. And in case there's a tie, who has most influence points on the influence track wins. Okay, so that was Dark Horse. I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly did, and I hope you now know how to play the game and can also decide whether this is something you're interested in. And yeah, so thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.